Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining today. This is the Mastering Your Discussion chapter. My name is Vanessa. I'm a qualitative research mentor here at Statistics Solutions. We are a full-service dissertation editing and consulting company, and we provide assistance to doctoral students with their research, both qualitative and quantitative, from topic development all the way to the final defense. So we have qualitative mentors, quantitative mentors, and research mentors on staff to assist doctoral students with any stage in the dissertation process. The webinar today is going to focus on the discussion chapter. We also have other webinars available, which are available on our website. We also have a lot of other complementary resources on our website, like a blog that may be helpful to you. So please feel free to check us out. We have Sierra on today. She'll be helping with the back end if there's any technical issues. And she's also posting some helpful links in the chat. So those are available to you if you're interested. If you do have any questions throughout the session, there will be a Q&A at the end. So feel free to pop those in the chat or to put them in the Q&A section. All right, so just to get us started, today I'm going to be reviewing the discussion chapter. So within that, we'll be talking about the introduction, interpretation of the findings, limitations, implications for practice, recommendations for future research, and the summary. So like any chapter in the dissertation, the introduction is meant to reorient the reader. So here you'll want to remind them of the purpose of your study by restating the purpose, and also remind them of the importance of your study. One important thing to note here is that when you are restating the purpose of your study, it's important to make sure that you are doing that completely verbatim from what you've already done throughout other chapters. So again, just remembering that the words have meaning. So if you change the wording for the purpose of your study, it may have implications for what's written here. So just make sure that you are copying and pasting that language each time that you're using the purpose. It may seem redundant, but it's just to provide greater clarity to your reader. Then you will want to remind the reader of the importance of your study. So you may want to highlight the gaps in the literature to bolster the rationale for why your study is important. And then you will include a brief preview of what you'll be presenting in the chapter. And you can use the headings that you intend to use in the chapter to provide that, that brief preview. So here you're kind of looking back, reminding the reader, why your study is important, but also looking forward and giving them an idea of what's to come. So the interpretation of the findings is going to be the meat of the chapter. Throughout your paper, you'll make conclusions and recommendations for practice or further research, and each of these will stem from the interpretations of the finding. So it's important that you have a solid foundation for all of those elements. Interpreting the findings means that you are relating what you found to the finding of previous research in your area or focus. And then depending on how your findings are situated in the previous research, you can make interpretations or conclusions based on that. So your findings might differ or coincide with previous findings. So the idea here is that you are thinking about your findings and really breaking down how they relate to previous literature. To organize this section, it can be helpful for both you as a writer and the reader to use subheadings, subsections, and headers. So if you are working on a quantitative study, you can make these headers based on your research question. So again, if you are doing a quantitative study, it's important to remember that this section here is not going to be a statistics heavy chapter. That is for your results section. But here you're really wanting to provide some important information of the general meaning and the overall, what you got out of the results chapter. So again, the results is going to be where the bulk of your statistics is. And here you're going to be kind of distilling that down further and adding some discussion around what those results mean in the context of existing literature. If you're conducting a qualitative study, then your headings might be based on themes. So different themes that arose throughout your analysis, you would want to list those out here, and you can discuss what the results mean under each theme. Again, you're going to want to talk about your findings in the context of how they relate to previous research. So that might look like saying something like, in the present study, we found XYZ, which confirms previous research conducted by a specific author. So really pointing out those citations from your chapter 2 as they relate to previous research and as it relates to your particular study. Next, you'll want to briefly explain any findings that don't support previous research. So, it may be possible that you have something in your study that hasn't been written about or hasn't been produced in previous studies. So you'll just want to talk about that and outline some reasons to support where this finding came from. So it could be that you used a different sampling method, or there was something related to the population that you're studying that may explain why your research isn't in alignment with previous research. So you'll just want to explain what that may be if it exists. And you'll just repeat each of these steps for each research question or theme that your study intends to answer. The next section in this chapter will be the limitations. So here I recommend a good starting point is to refer back to your proposal, where you most likely outlined any limitations that you anticipated when you were crafting your prospectus document. That will be a good place to start to give you ideas for what limitations may have risen or what limitations you were preparing for when you were starting your study. So one thing to note here is that limitations should only be things that occurred that had the potential to change your results. So just thinking about drawing a distinction here between a challenge, which may have been a difficulty that you faced during your study, whereas a limitation is something that actually really could have affected the results. So some limitations that you might describe are things like not being able to access a particular data set or not being able to achieve a specific sample size. One example that's pretty timely is maybe due to the pandemic, you weren't able to achieve a specific sample size because of in-person recruitment. So things like that are things that you'll want to report here in this section as limitations. Next, you'll want to discuss the generalizability of your results to the larger sample population. So usually if your study is quantitative and you had a sufficient number of participants, chances are your findings should generalize pretty well, especially if you use a random sample method, which can be more representative of a larger sample than something like a convenient sample, which is just using people that you have access to. And then if you are doing a qualitative study, this will differ a little bit because the nature of a qualitative study is that it's generally smaller. And rather than trying to generalize your findings, you're more trying to shed light and insight on a specific phenomenon that you're studying. So you'll just want to, depending on what type of study you have, describe what that looks like for your study. And particularly if you are doing that qual study, you can note that you are not aiming to generalize your findings to a larger population, but rather to really highlight the experiences of participants and shed light and greater meaning on participant discussion. The next section will be implications for practice. This section and recommendations for further research are meant to talk about why your findings are important. So far you've, outlined your results in the results section. Now you are talking about what the findings are in greater context with the literature. And then when you get to these two sections that I'll talk about, you're really just talking about what these mean in the real world, outside of the bubble of your study. So in the implications for practice, you'll want to talk about how the population that you're studying may be able to apply what you've found. So for example, if you're doing a study related to school administrators, what are the implications for these administrators? Is your study illuminating maybe potential trainings that they can use to, better their work? Is it showing different methods that they may be able to employ? What does that really look like in the real world? So these can be specific depending on the findings of your study. You may also want to use this section to weave your theory in if there are obvious places where it might seem appropriate to do that. So again, really focusing on what is your sample, what is the population that you are, trying to impact with this study, and how can they use the findings from your study in their general practice. And then in the recommendations for further research, again, you're going to be explaining to the reader how your findings contribute to different recommendations that others may look into. So these should be based on your findings and also your limitations. So any finding from your study that is new or novel or unexpected, you can recommend further research on that. So going back to maybe a discrepant case or any outliers in your study, you may be able to, zero in on that and recommend that future studies focus on those specific discrepant cases to try to understand what may have caused that. Or if your research does agree with previous research, doesn't agree with previous research. So if your findings are very divergent from what you found in your literature search, that may suggest that there's some inconclusiveness. So you can recommend that even further research be conducted to try to align, these findings and understand why is this different from previous research? Are there sampling concerns? Are there bias concerns? What can be done to really bring clarity to this specific topic? And then again, you can also make recommendations based on the limitations from your study. So you can do that by acknowledging what the limitations are and then cultivating different recommendations to correct those in order to replicate your study. So for example, if you did a quantitative study, but you weren't able to achieve the sample size that you had wanted to, you might recommend future research with an increased sample size or, a different type of research design. So here you'll just kind of think through what can be done to further your particular study and what factors other researchers might want to look towards or in the direction of if they do try to replicate this in a way that would contribute to the literature. And then you'll finish off this chapter with a summary section. So first things first, always make sure to check your school's template to ensure that you are including all of the elements that they're expecting in this section. The presentation today covers generally what we've seen most schools ask for, but just make sure to check in with your chair or your committee to see if they have a template or a checklist, because that will give you, the best advice on what to include in the chapter. And at the end of the day, they're going to be signing off on your dissertation. So you want to make sure that you're including exactly what they expect. But then overall, the summary chapter should just be, if your chair only has time to read the summary, what key points do you want to include in that section? So here really kind of trying to be brief and concise and just providing the key messages that are of importance to your entire discussion section. So just thinking about what those take-home messages are. I do recommend that when you write this section out, as you go through the discussion chapter, each time that you enter information under a specific subheading, it's helpful to just throw a few bullets in what your summary section would be. And then when it comes time to write the summary overall, you can kind of just mold that into a narrative form. And it helps take some of the, the drafting work out of it because you're already doing it as you're writing the chapter. But that is the last slide for today. Again, We do offer these services. So if you're interested or if you feel that you may benefit from additional help or more specific help, please do feel free to contact us. We have our contact information in the chat, and we do offer a free consultation. So if you need help, but you're not really sure where to start, one of our staff members can help identify, where you might need the best support and how we can help you. But now we will open it up for questions. So if you do have any questions, feel free to pop those in the chat. And I forgot to mention that you will all receive copies of the slides and also the recording of today's webinar. It's also going to be available on our webinar archive library, and the link is in the chat. And again, we do have various topics. So if you need help with results, writing the results section, introduction, literature search, whatever it may be, whether you're doing qualitative, quantitative, or mixed methods, we do have videos and slide decks for all of those sections as well. Yvonne, I see you put a question in the chat. Okay, here we go. So Yvonne's question is, if I use a particular test, but there's debate in the field, should I include this in my discussion? So your discussion should really focus on what the results are, but if you want to include information about a particular test, that may be in earlier chapters, like your data analysis plan, or your methods where you're justifying what type of analysis you're going to be conducting for your study. So I don't recommend including it in the discussion. Laura, okay, you will be emailed the slides. And again, we do have various slide decks on different chapters in the archives library. So you can also use that link if you're interested in reviewing different webinars. You're welcome. I'm glad it's helpful. And I will put the link in one more time here. Oh, Sierra beat me to it. Thank you, Sierra. Daniela, I'm not sure what you mean by certification. I can unmute you if you'd like to talk a little bit more to that. Okay, I just gave you the talking feature if you could provide more information. Laura, did you have a question? I see your hand is raised. Okay, try that. Let's see if you can see that link now. Okay, perfect. Okay, well, that will conclude our session. If anybody does have questions, I will stick around. But if not, thank you all for joining today. And again, check out our webinar series. We do have a lot of other options if you're interested in, continuing to review some of these resources. And best of luck as you pull your dissertations together.